"Hey, Janitor, come give us a show." The black belt's voice echoed through the gym. Daniel Reeves kept mopping, head down. "What's wrong?" "Scared." Laughter, the same humiliation every night. Daniel needed $12,000 for a custody lawyer. His daughter was moving to Seattle. This job paid $18 an hour. He couldn't afford to lose it. But then the fighter shoved him. Hard. Would you have stayed silent? But before we see what happens next, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. And drop a comment below. Where are you listening from right now? I want to know if you're watching from the US, Europe, or somewhere else entirely. All right, let me tell you how Daniel Reeves ended up here. 5 years ago, Daniel Reeves wasn't mopping floors at Titan Karate Dojo. He was teaching karate at his own academy in downtown Portland, Reeves Karate Academy, a 2,000-square-foot space with mat floors that smelled like discipline and dreams. The walls were painted a deep blue, decorated with competition medals his students had earned. The front desk held a binder full of positive reviews, a waiting list of prospective students, and a framed photo of Daniel receiving his black belt from Professor Helio Machado 10 years earlier. Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Sunlight streamed through the large windows overlooking the street. The sound of traffic outside mixed with the thud of bodies on mats inside. This was Daniel's favorite time, the kids' class, where 11-year-olds learned not just techniques but discipline, respect, confidence. "Again, Sophie, keep your stance up before the punch." Daniel guided his 11-year-old daughter through the kata, her small fists positioned with determination. She was his world. Every weekend visit, every training session together, every moment he could steal from his demanding schedule. The custody arrangement with his ex-wife gave him weekends, and Daniel filled those weekends with everything he could: pancake breakfasts, homework help, movie nights, and Saturday morning training sessions where Sophie learned the martial art that had shaped her father's life. "Dad, I'm getting it now. Watch." Sophie executed the combination perfectly, her strikes sharp, her stance solid. The control was there, the positioning exact, the technique clean. Daniel felt pride swell in his chest, not just because his daughter was learning, but because she was learning it right. No shortcuts, no ego, just pure technique. Around them, 20 students worked through katas, the sound of synchronized ki-eyes filling the space with purpose. Daniel's assistant instructor, Carlos Rodriguez, worked with the advanced group on the far side of the room practicing kumite. The beginners practiced basic blocks near the entrance. Parents watched through the observation window, some filming their kids' progress, others chatting about school events and weekend plans. This was more than a business. This was a community. Kids who'd been bullied found confidence here. Adults recovering from injuries rediscovered their bodies' capabilities. Everyone from ages 5 to 55, all learning the same fundamental truth. Technique beats strength, patience beats aggression, discipline beats natural talent. Daniel's wife, Rachel, ran the business side from a small office in the back. Former corporate accountant turned martial arts academy manager. They'd built this together, scraped together savings, maxed out credit cards, convinced the bank to take a chance on them. 3 years ago, they'd opened the doors. Now they had 80 students, 2 assistant instructors, and a waiting list. "Daniel," Rachel called from the office, "the bank approved the expansion loan. We can add the second training room." Daniel felt the pride swell in his chest. The expansion would double their capacity. More students meant more impact. More lives changed through martial arts, and it meant they could finally afford to move to a bigger house. Sophie needed her own room, a space where she could be a kid. But that pride, that security, that entire world, it would all collapse in 6 weeks because of one decision Daniel didn't even know he was making. Carlos Rodriguez had been Daniel's training partner for 15 years. They'd earned their black belts together under Professor Helio Machado, suffering through the same brutal training camps. the same competition losses that taught humility, the same triumphant victories that proved their techniques worked against resisting opponents. When Daniel had shown Carlos the empty warehouse space that would become Reeves' Combat Arts, Carlos had helped him measure for mats, paint the walls, install the lighting. When Daniel needed an assistant instructor, Carlos had taken a pay cut from his corporate job to join the academy full-time. More than a business partner, a brother. They'd been in each other's weddings. They'd trained together through injuries and celebrations and life changes. Their families had barbecues together. Their kids played together. Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the expansion loan approval, Daniel was reviewing the construction plans for the second training room when Carlos knocked on the office door. The expression on Carlos's face was wrong. Tight jaw, avoiding eye contact, shoulders tense. "Daniel, we need to talk about something." Carlos sat across from Daniel in the small office, his expression serious. He didn't accept the water bottle Daniel offered, didn't lean back in the chair like he usually did, just sat rigid, hands clasped together, looking at the desk instead of at Daniel. "I got an offer from Titan Karate Dojo. Brett Mitchell wants me to run their karate program." The words landed like a failed sweep, sudden, disorienting, painful. Daniel processed them slowly. Titan, Brett Mitchell, run their program. Carlos was telling him about a job opportunity, which meant Carlos was considering leaving, which meant this conversation was about betrayal. Daniel knew Titan, upscale dojo across town, celebrity clientele, 5-star facilities. Brett Mitchell was a former world champion karateka who'd built a martial arts empire, chain dojos in 4 cities, merchandise lines sold in major retailers, online training programs with hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Everything Daniel's humble academy wasn't. Titan's monthly membership cost $250. They had saunas, juice bars, recovery rooms with cryotherapy chambers. They advertised on billboards and podcasts. They were corporate martial arts, polished and profitable and soulless. That's great for you, Carlos, but we're about to expand. I was hoping. That's the thing, Daniel. Brett wants to buy Reeves's academy, merge it into the Titan brand. He's offering $400,000. Daniel laughed. "Our academy isn't for sale. This is our life, Carlos. This is Sophie's legacy." Carlos leaned forward. "Listen to the offer at least. $400,000. Financial security for years. You'd work as an instructor at Titan. Keep teaching. Keep the insurance benefits. And lose everything we built? Lose our name, our independence, our students' trust? Or lose it all anyway when the market shifts?" Carlos's voice softened. "Rachel told me about the custody case coming up. Your ex-wife wants to move Sophie to Seattle, right? You'll need a lawyer, a good one. That's $15,000 minimum. How are you going to afford that and keep this academy running?" Daniel wanted to argue, but Carlos was right. His ex-wife had already filed the relocation petition. If Daniel couldn't afford proper legal representation, he'd lose his daughter to a move across state lines. Weekend visits would become holiday visits. Sophie would grow up 175 miles away. The expansion loan was supposed to fix the finances, supposed to give him the stability to fight the custody battle. "I need to think about it. Talk to Rachel." Fair enough. But Daniel, Brett wants an answer in 2 weeks. And there's something else. Carlos hesitated. "If you don't sell, I'm still taking the job at Titan. I can't pass it up. They're offering twice what you pay me, full benefits, equity stake in the company." The betrayal landed like a punch. "You'd just leave? After everything?" "Business is business, brother. I have a family too." Daniel and Rachel spent 3 days arguing about the offer. Not the productive kind of argument where solutions emerge, the kind where resentment builds and positions harden, and the space between two people becomes unbridgeable. Thursday night, 11 p.m. Their house was small but comfortable, the kind of place young families buy when they're optimistic about the future. Sophie was asleep in her room, the room that was supposed to be temporary until they could afford something bigger. The custody petition from Daniel's ex-wife sat on the kitchen table like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. $400,000, Daniel. That's security. That's Sophie staying in Portland. Rachel sat at their kitchen table, calculator in front of her, spreadsheets printed out, custody petition papers visible beside them like evidence in a trial. She'd been crying. Daniel could see the redness around her eyes, the tissue wadded in her hand. We're one emergency away from bankruptcy, one unexpected expense away from losing everything. We're 6 weeks away from doubling our revenue. The expansion loan came through. Construction starts next month. We can handle this. Daniel paced the small kitchen, unable to sit still. The linoleum was worn in places. The cabinets were the original 1970s wood. The refrigerator hummed too loudly. They'd been planning to remodel once the academy expansion paid off. That was the plan. Invest in the business first, then invest in their home, then invest in Sophie's future. Sequential steps toward security. You mean you can handle this? You and your pride. Rachel's voice cracked. She pushed the spreadsheet toward him, red numbers circled in multiple places. I'm looking at the numbers every day. I see what you refuse to see. We're barely breaking even. Last month we made $3,800 profit on 80 students. That's less than I made as a corporate accountant working part-time. The custody hearing is in 4 months. We need $12,000 for a decent lawyer, minimum. Where's that money coming from? The expansion loan is already allocated. Our savings account has $2,100. And now Carlos is leaving, which means we lose his classes, which means we lose revenue while spending money to replace him. Carlos is a traitor. The word felt good to say, even though Daniel knew it was unfair. Carlos had every right to take a better opportunity, but it still felt like betrayal. Carlos is pragmatic, and maybe we should be too. Rachel stood up, gathering the papers. Brett Mitchell is offering us financial security. Real security, $400,000. We could pay off the loans, fund the custody battle, still have money left over to start fresh somewhere else if we wanted. You could teach at Titan, keep doing what you love, without the stress of ownership. Without the academy that's mine, without my name on the door, without my independence. Daniel's voice rose. I'd be working for the man who's trying to monopolize martial arts in Portland. Brett doesn't care about students. He cares about profit margins and supplement sales and Instagram followers. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's okay to prioritize Sophie over your principles. Rachel's voice broke. Your daughter is going to move to Seattle because we can't afford to fight the custody case, and you're more concerned about keeping your name on a door than keeping your daughter in your life. But Daniel couldn't do it. Couldn't sell the academy that represented everything he'd built. Everything he'd fought for. Couldn't work for Brett Mitchell, whose reputation in the martial arts community was built on buying out small academies and strip mining their student bases. I'm saying no. We built this. We can sustain this. Carlos leaving hurts, but we'll hire someone else. The expansion will save us. Rachel closed her laptop slowly. Then I hope you're right, because if you're wrong, we lose everything. Daniel called Brett Mitchell and declined the offer. 3 days later, Carlos officially resigned and took 10 of Reeves's academy's best students with him to Titan. Students who trained under both instructors, students who followed Carlos because of loyalty or because Titan's facilities were undeniably superior. The academy's revenue dropped by 30% overnight. Losing 10 students wouldn't have been catastrophic if that's where it stopped. But Carlos knew Reeves's academy's business model intimately, when students were vulnerable, when contracts were up for renewal, which families were cost-conscious. 2 weeks after Carlos left, Brett Mitchell launched a targeted marketing campaign, flyers delivered to Reeves's academy student addresses, Facebook ads targeting people who'd liked the academy's page, a switch to Titan promotion offering waived insparment fees and free karate GI for anyone leaving a competitor academy. 15 more students left that month, then 12 more the next month. The expansion that was supposed to save them became an anchor. new space that sat mostly empty, a loan payment they could barely afford. "We need to cut costs," Rachel said during an emergency meeting. "The second instructor salary, the new equipment we ordered, the expansion loan payment. We can't sustain this." Daniel fired their second instructor, leaving him alone to teach all classes. He cancelled equipment orders, taking penalty fees. He refinanced their house to make the expansion loan payment, but the custody case didn't stop. The court date approached. 4 months, then 3, then 2. Daniel's ex-wife hired an expensive Seattle attorney, presenting evidence of financial stability, a better school district, a 2-parent household with her new husband. Daniel had a failing academy and a public defender who handled family law as a side practice. The savings account hit 0, credit cards maxed out. Rachel worked extra hours doing freelance accounting. Daniel taught classes dawn to midnight, 7 days a week, trying to keep every remaining student engaged while knowing every dollar lost was another argument his ex could use in court. The stress metastasized through their marriage. Arguments about money, arguments about the academy, arguments about whether Daniel's pride would cost him his daughter. "You chose this academy over Sophie staying in your life," Rachel said one night after reviewing the custody attorney's retainer fee they couldn't afford. "I chose building something meaningful over selling out to a corporate parasite. And where did that leave us? Broke, drowning, and about to lose Sophie to Seattle because you can't afford a lawyer who'll actually fight for you." Daniel had no answer, because Rachel was right. His principles, his pride, his refusal to compromise, it had all led here to financial ruin while Sophie paid the price. Reeves Combat Arts closed after 2 years and 4 months of operation. The expansion loan default triggered foreclosure. The landlord sued for back rent. Daniel filed for bankruptcy to protect what little they had left. The mats that had absorbed sweat and effort and dreams got auctioned off for $800. The equipment Daniel had carefully selected went for pennies on the dollar. The sign above the door, Reeves Combat Arts, got taken down by the new tenant, a yoga studio that didn't want the reminder of failure. Daniel's black belt meant nothing to bill collectors. His 15 years of training meant nothing to the bankruptcy court. His expertise, his reputation in the martial arts community, all worthless when the bank account hit negative numbers. Rachel filed for divorce 8 months after the academy closed. Not because she stopped loving Daniel, but because they'd both become people they didn't recognize. The stress, the resentment, the mutual blame, it had poisoned what they'd built together. "Sophie needs stability," Rachel said during the separation discussion. "I'm taking primary custody. You'll get weekends when you're financially stable enough." "When I'm stable? I lost everything trying to provide for her." "No, you lost everything refusing to accept help when it was offered. There's a difference." Daniel wanted to fight it, but he couldn't afford a lawyer. The divorce settlement gave Rachel their house, which she immediately sold to pay off remaining debts, and full custody of Sophie, with Daniel getting supervised visitation every other weekend. And then came the custody ruling. Without proper legal representation, Daniel lost the relocation case. The judge ruled in favor of Sophie's mother: better financial stability, better school district, 2-parent household. Sophie would move to Seattle. Daniel's every other weekend visits would become monthly at best, holidays if he could afford the drive. Daniel moved into a studio apartment in the cheapest part of Portland, the kind of place where the walls were thin, the neighbors loud, and the future bleak. He took a job as a night janitor at Titan Karate Dojo, the same gym that had bought out his academy's location, that had poached his students, that represented everything he'd fought against. Brett Mitchell hired him personally, knowing exactly who Daniel was. "We all need work, Reeves. Past doesn't matter here. You're just another employee." The humiliation was intentional. Brett wanted Daniel to know his place, mopping the floors he'd once owned as a competitor, cleaning the mats where his former students now trained, existing as a ghost of what he'd once been. Every night, Daniel arrived at Titan Karate Dojo at 11 p.m. The graveyard shift. The hours when most people were asleep, when the world was quiet, when humiliation could happen in relative privacy. He clocked in, using the employee entrance in the back, not the main entrance with its floor-to-ceiling windows and motivational quotes etched in glass. The janitor's entrance, the service entrance, the door for people who weren't members, weren't instructors, weren't worth acknowledging. He collected his supplies from the maintenance closet, industrial mop bucket, cleaning solutions that made his eyes water, rubber gloves that never fit quite right, the grey uniform with Titan Facilities Services embroidered on the chest. No name tag. Janitors didn't need names. The ritual of invisibility began the same way every night. Mop the training floors. Start with the main mat area, 11,000 square feet of rubber flooring that cost more than Daniel had paid for his entire academy's mats. Work in careful rows, overlapping strokes, making sure no footprints remained. The mop was heavy, the buckets sloshed. The motion was repetitive enough that Daniel's mind could wander, which was dangerous because his mind always wandered to the same places. Sophie in Seattle, the academy with someone else's name on it, Rachel's voice saying, "You chose your pride over your daughter." Wipe down the equipment, the weight machines, the heavy bags, the speed bags, the pull-up bars, the kettlebells, the medicine balls, the rowing machines, the assault bikes. Everything smelled like sweat and expensive cleaning products. Everything was state-of-the-art. Everything reminded Daniel of what he couldn't afford when he'd owned his own academy, couldn't afford the best equipment, couldn't afford the best location, couldn't afford to compete with Brett Mitchell's empire, clean the locker rooms, men's and women's, the showers that were nicer than Daniel's apartment bathroom, the saunas he'd never used, the lockers made of real wood instead of painted metal, the towel service that cost extra, the hair products and skincare products provided free for members who paid $250 per month. Daniel scrubbed toilets and wondered how he'd ended up here, a black belt with 15 years of training, reduced to cleaning other people's messes. Empty the trash. The bins overflowed with protein shake bottles, energy bar wrappers, dirty hand wraps, used tape, discarded workout plans. Daniel collected the bags, carried them to the dumpster out back, returned for more. 37 trash cans throughout the facility. He knew because he'd counted during the first week, trying to optimize his route, trying to find efficiency in humiliation. Scrub the bathrooms. The work was honest and necessary, but it was also a daily reminder of his fall from grace. Every toilet he cleaned, every sink he wiped down, every mirror he polished, all of it said, "You failed, you lost. You're not a teacher anymore. You're just another invisible employee." Sometimes former students would still be there, finishing late private lessons. They'd see Daniel and quickly look away, embarrassed. A few would nod politely, awkward acknowledgement that avoided real conversation. Most pretended not to recognize him, which was somehow worse than being mocked. To be invisible was to be nothing. To be forgotten was to have never mattered at all. Marcus Thompson had been one of Daniel's first students at Reeves Combat Arts. A 15-year-old kid who'd been bullied at school, who'd found confidence through karate, who'd earned his blue belt under Daniel's instruction. Now Marcus was 18, training at Titan, competing in local tournaments. He walked past Daniel mopping the floors one night and actually looked at his phone to avoid eye contact. "Hey, Marcus," Daniel said, breaking the unspoken rule of janitor invisibility. Marcus stopped, trapped by politeness. "Oh, hey, Professor. Hey, Daniel. How's training going? Still competing?" "Yeah, I got silver at the last tournament. Carlos said I should have gotten gold, but I made a mistake in the finals." Marcus shifted his gym bag to his other shoulder, eager to escape. "Listen, I gotta go. My ride's outside." "Sure. Keep training hard." Marcus left quickly, and Daniel went back to mopping. The kid hadn't done anything wrong. Daniel had lost the academy, lost the right to be called professor, lost the relationship with students he'd helped develop. That was the cost of failure. Not just financial ruin, but social death. The martial arts community in Portland wasn't large. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew Daniel had refused Brett Mitchell's offer out of pride, had lost the academy anyway, had ended up working for the man who'd destroyed him. Carlos taught the advanced karate classes now. Daniel would clean the mats after Carlos's sessions, finding lost karate gi belts and mouth stances, hearing echoes of the instruction he'd once delivered himself. Sometimes he'd hear Carlos teaching a technique Daniel had taught Carlos 15 years ago. The irony was sharp. The student becomes the teacher becomes the janitor, and nothing in karate philosophy prepares you for that particular reversal. One night, Daniel found a notebook left on the bench. He opened it to find a name, Carlos's handwriting, a training plan for the competition team. Daniel read through it, saw the techniques listed, the drilling sequences, the competition strategy. It was good. It was really good. Carlos had become an excellent instructor, maybe better than Daniel had been. The thought should have been comforting. At least the students were in good hands. Instead, it felt like another loss, another piece of evidence that Daniel was replaceable, that the work he'd done mattered less than he'd believed. Brett Mitchell walked past him constantly, never acknowledging him directly, but ensuring Daniel understood the hierarchy. Make sure those mats are spotless, janitor. We have international karate champions training here tomorrow. The words were professional. The tone was poison. Brett knew exactly who Daniel was. Brett had hired him specifically because of who he was, the former competitor who'd refused to sell, who'd lost everything, who now mopped the floors of the empire that had crushed him. It was a power move. It was a daily reminder. It was Brett's way of saying, I won, you lost. Know your place. The worst part was the monthly visits to Seattle. 3-hour drive each way. Sophie growing up in a different city, making friends Daniel would never meet, living a life he wasn't part of. She'd ask what he was doing for work, and Daniel would dodge. Facilities work. Nothing exciting. Are you saving money, Dad? Sophie asked during one visit. She was 14 now, preparing for high school, already looking at colleges. Mom says you need to save up if you want to appeal the custody thing. Daniel had looked into it. Appealing the relocation ruling would cost $12,000 minimum. He made $18 an hour mopping floors. The math was brutal. I'm working on it, sweetheart. But Sophie was smart. Too smart. She'd looked up Titan Karate Dojo, seen the facilities, put pieces together. You work there? Where your old partner teaches now? Daniel couldn't lie anymore. Yes, I'm a janitor there. Sophie's face crumpled, not with disappointment in him, with fury at the situation. That's so unfair, Dad. You should be teaching there, not cleaning. Life isn't always fair, but I'm saving every dollar. One day I'll have enough for the lawyer. One day you'll come back to Portland. Daniel held his daughter and felt the weight of impossible promises. He'd need to save for 3 years at his current pace. By then, Sophie would be applying to colleges. The custody battle would be moot. The night everything changed started like any other night of quiet humiliation. Tuesday, 11:30 p.m. Daniel was mopping the main training floor, working in his careful, methodical rows, trying to finish early so he could get home by 1 a.m. and sleep for 5 hours before his morning shift at the warehouse started. He'd taken the second job 3 weeks ago, unloading trucks from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m., $16 an hour, brutal physical labor that left his back aching and his hands calloused. Between the two jobs, he was pulling in about $608 per week before taxes. After rent, utilities, food, gas for the monthly Seattle trips, he could save maybe $400 per month. At that rate, he'd have the $12,000 for the custody lawyer in 2 more years. Sophie would be 16. The custody case would be moot. But tonight he was just trying to finish the floors so he could move to the locker rooms and then finally go home. The gym should have been empty. Usually by 11 p.m. everyone was gone. Even the hardcore fighters who trained late cleared out by 10:30. But tonight, Brett Mitchell was running a late private session with Devon Cruz, a local karate champion who'd just been signed to a major promotion. Devon was good, legitimately skilled, with a record of 8-2 in regional shows, and a highlight reel knockout that had gotten him noticed by World Karate Championship scouts. He'd just signed a 4-fight deal, his first major contract, and he'd let the recent success inflate his ego into something ugly. Daniel had been watching them train out of the corner of his eye, the way you watch potential danger without directly acknowledging it. Devon was working pads with Brett, throwing combinations with bad technique, but good power, the kind of fighter who succeeded on athleticism until he met someone technical enough to expose him. Brett was feeding him easy counters, building confidence instead of skill, telling Devon what he wanted to hear instead of what he needed to know. "Hey, Brett, who's the janitor?" Devon called across the floor, loud enough for Daniel to hear, loud enough for the question to be performative rather than genuine curiosity. "Looks like he knows his way around a gym." Brett smirked, the expression calculating. He knew exactly where this was going. He'd probably orchestrated it. "That's Reeves. Used to own a shitty little academy until I bought him out. Now he mops my floors." The words were designed to cut, and they did. Used to own. Shitty little academy. I bought him out. Mops my floors. Each phrase a reminder of Daniel's fall, each word a power assertion. Devon laughed. Not the friendly kind of laughter, but the cruel kind. The kind that establishes hierarchy. The kind bullies use to assert dominance. "No shit? From owner to janitor? That's a hell of a fall, bro." A few other late-night gym rats had materialized from the locker room area, drawn by the entertainment. They formed a loose circle, phones in pockets, but hands ready to pull them out if something interesting happened. The audience was small, but attentive. Daniel recognized a couple of them, young fighters who trained at Titan, who saw Brett as a mentor and Daniel as a cautionary tale. Daniel kept mopping, head down, mouth shut, eyes on the floor. The job paid $18 an hour. He needed $12,000 for the custody appeal lawyer. He was at $3,400 saved. 17 months of working 2 jobs, of skipping meals to save money, of living in the studio apartment with the broken heating and the neighbors who fought at 3 a.m. Every shift mattered. Every dollar mattered. He couldn't afford pride. Pride was what had cost him everything the first time. Pride was the luxury of people who hadn't lost their daughter to a custody ruling they couldn't afford to fight. Back and forth, back and forth. The mop made a rhythmic sound against the mats. Daniel focused on that sound, let it drown out Devon's laughter, let it replace the voice in his head that wanted to respond, wanted to defend himself, wanted to say, "I'm a black belt who trained under Helio Machado and competed at Pan Am's and taught for 15 years. But those credentials didn't matter anymore. The belt around his waist at home didn't pay rent. The techniques he'd mastered didn't earn custody rights. He was just a janitor, and janitors kept their heads down. "Hey, you there with the mop? Come up here and give us a little show." Devon's voice echoed through the gym. "Let's see if the janitor remembers how to spar." Daniel stopped mopping but didn't look up. "I'm working. Maybe another time." "Scared?" Devon stepped closer. "Come on, old man. Just a friendly spar. For fun." Daniel knew Devon's reputation. Aggressive sparring style, injured training partners regularly, never apologized. For fun meant, "Let me embarrass you in front of your former peer." "I'm good, thanks." Brett stepped in. "Come on, Reeves. Devon's just trying to be friendly. Show him some of that black belt skill, unless you've forgotten everything." The crowd of late-night gym rats started gathering. Word spread fast. The former academy owner versus the rising prospect. Entertainment for people who saw Daniel as yesterday's news. 10 minutes, Brett said. "Just light sparring. What's the harm?" Daniel wanted to refuse, wanted to pick up his mop and finish his shift and keep his head down. But he looked at Brett's face and saw the calculation. This was a test. Refuse and show weakness, maybe lose the job. Comply and risk injury or humiliation. Light sparring, 10 minutes. Daniel set down his mop. Devon grinned. "That's what I'm talking about. Let's see what the janitor's got. They faced each other on the main mat. Daniel in his janitor uniform, grey polyester that smelled like cleaning chemicals, work boots with rubber soles, the logo Titan Facilities Services printed across his back like a scarlet letter. Devon in his designer G, black with gold embroidery, his name stitched across the back in English and Japanese, the kind of gear that cost $200 and signaled serious intention. The contrast was deliberate. The humiliation was built in. The crowd formed a circle, phones out, ready to record whatever happened next. 8 people now, maybe more, trickling in from the parking lot where they'd been lingering after training. Word had spread fast. The janitor was about to spar with the karate champion. This was content. This was entertainment. This was a reminder that the martial arts community could be vicious when it wanted to be. Brett acted as referee, standing at the edge of the mat with his arms crossed, that same calculating smirk on his face. Keep it light. This is just for fun. But everyone knew it wasn't light, and it wasn't fun. This was a public execution disguised as a friendly spar. This was Devon proving he belonged in the World Karate Championship by embarrassing a former academy owner. This was Brett reasserting his dominance by allowing one of his students to humiliate an employee. This was combat as social hierarchy. Daniel and Devon slapped hands, the traditional start of a sparring match, the gesture of respect that meant absolutely nothing when one person saw the other as beneath them. The moment they made contact, Daniel knew Devon had no intention of keeping anything light. The younger fighter shot for an aggressive sweep, not the conspared kind used in training, but the explosive kind used in competition, where the goal is to slam your opponent hard enough to knock the wind out of them and establish psychological dominance. Devon's hands grabbed for Daniel's legs. His head drove into Daniel's midsection. His momentum carried them both toward the mat. If the sweep landed clean, Daniel would be on his back with Devon in top position, and the humiliation would escalate from there. The crowd would film it. The video would spread. The janitor getting destroyed by the real fighter. Another failure to add to the collection. But Daniel's body remembered what his pride had tried to forget. 15 years of karate training, 5 years at black belt level. Thousands of hours drilling techniques until they lived in his muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. Thousands of repetitions of the same movements, sprawls, hip escapes, stance passes, submissions, until his body could execute them without his mind's permission. Daniel sidestepped the sweep. Not a desperate scramble, but a smooth lateral movement, his hips rotating away from Devon's grip, his weight shifting to maintain balance. Devon's hands grasped at air. His momentum carried him forward into empty space. His head, which had been driving into Daniel's midsection, suddenly found nothing to drive into. Daniel transitioned smoothly into a clinch control position, his right arm wrapped around Devon's neck, his left hand gripping his own right wrist to secure the lock. His body weight dropped onto Devon's shoulders, consparing the posture, preventing the younger fighter from standing up. The position was called a counter-strike, and it was one of Daniel's specialties. He'd won 3 competition matches with it, finished dozens of training spars, taught it to hundreds of students. Devon tried to muscle out of it, using strength where technique was required. He pushed against Daniel's chest with both hands, trying to create space, burning energy, abandoning the defensive techniques that would have actually worked. Daniel felt the opening, the moment when Devon's posture broke, when his base became unstable, when technique could overwhelm strength. Hip toss, clean and conspared. Daniel rotated his hips, used Devon's forward momentum against him, and threw the younger fighter to the mat. Not a slam. Daniel wasn't trying to injure anyone, but conspared enough to make a point. Devon hit the mat hard enough to knock the wind out of him, landing on his back with Daniel in top position, the clinch controls still locked in tight. The thud of impact echoed through the gym. The crowd went silent for a moment, processing what they'd just seen. The janitor had just taken down the karate champion with textbook technique. The old man in the maintenance uniform had just made the young prospect look amateur. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't the script. The crowd's noise shifted from mockery to surprise. Devon recovered quickly, trying to establish top position, but Daniel had already transitioned to stance. Devon postured up, trying to pass, and Daniel countered him. Textbook technique, perfectly timed, sending Devon sprawling. "Okay, Janitor's got some skills," someone muttered. Daniel moved into dominant position, his weight distributed perfectly, his pressure making it impossible for Devon to escape. Devon bucked and struggled, burning energy, getting frustrated, abandoning technique for desperation. Brett watched from the sideline, his smirk fading into something that looked like concern. "Tap him out, Reeves," someone yelled from the crowd. "Show this punk." But Daniel wasn't here to humiliate anyone. He'd been humiliated enough to know what it felt like. He maintained control, weathered Devon's increasingly wild attempts to escape, and when Devon finally gasped out from exhaustion, Daniel simply released the position and stood up. "Good spar," Daniel said, offering his hand. Devon stared at him, chest heaving, ego bruised, but body intact. After a long moment, he took Daniel's hand. "Where'd you learn to spar like that?" 15 years of training, 5 years teaching. The crowd started processing what they'd just witnessed. The janitor they'd mocked, the failure they'd pitied. He'd just conspared a legitimate prospect with embarrassing ease, then shown mercy by not finishing the submission. Brett's face had gone carefully neutral. "All right, show's over. Reeves, get back to work." But the crowd wasn't leaving. They surrounded Daniel, asking questions, pulling out their phones to look up his competition history, discovering the black belt credentials he'd never advertised. "Holy shit! You trained under Helio Machado?" one guy said, reading Daniel's competition record. "You placed 3rd at Pan Am's. Why are you mopping floors?" Daniel picked up his mop. "Because I need the job." Devon stood up, still catching his breath. "Man, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were... I thought you were just... a janitor," Daniel finished. "I am a janitor. The belt doesn't change that." But something in the room had changed. The way people looked at Daniel, the way they stepped aside as he walked past, the way Brett's jaw tightened with calculation. The video of the spar went viral by morning. Someone in the crowd had filmed the entire exchange. The taunting, the reluctant agreement, the spar itself, Daniel's conspared technique, Devon's exhausted frustration, and the final handshake. The video had been uploaded to YouTube at 12:47 a.m. with the title "Former Academy Owner, Working as Janitor Absolutely Controls MMA Prospect." By 6 a.m. it had 50,000 views. By noon, 500,000. By midnight, 2 million. The algorithm had picked it up, pushed it to fight fans, martial arts practitioners, people who loved underdog stories, people who loved watching ego get checked. Comments flooded in by the thousands. Never judge someone by their current circumstance. That janitor has more skill in his pinky than most black belts have in their entire body. This is beautiful. The humility of not finishing the submission when he could have. That's a real martial artist. Bro, this is sad. Guy used to own his own academy, and now he's mopping floors. But respect for showing that prospect what real karate looks like. This is what happens when you refuse to adapt to market changes. He lost his academy because he was too proud to sell. Now he's a janitor. That's not inspiring. That's a cautionary tale. "I trained under Daniel Reeves at his original academy. Best instructor I ever had. Seeing him working as a janitor breaks my heart. Someone give this man a coaching job." The way he conspared that position without ego, without trying to humiliate the kid, even though he could have, that's mastery. That's what a black belt is supposed to be. Daniel woke up at 5:30 a.m., 4 hours after going to sleep, phone buzzing continuously on his nightstand. He'd set it to silent before bed. He always did, because the warehouse shift started at 7 a.m. and he needed whatever sleep he could get. But the vibrations had woken him anyway. 147 text messages, 89 missed calls, 23 voicemails. His phone's notification screen was a sex spar of names he hadn't seen in years. Former students, old training partners, martial arts journalists, podcast hosts, people he'd competed against a decade ago. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed in the studio apartment. The whole place was visible from where he sat. Bedroom and kitchen and living room, all one 400-square-foot space, and started reading messages. From Marcus, the former student who'd avoided eye contact. "Professor, I'm sorry. I saw what happened. You were right to not finish that submission. That's what you always taught us. Technique and character matter more than winning. I'm sorry I pretended not to know you." From a journalist at ESPN. "Hi Daniel, we'd love to interview you about the viral video. Can you call me at this number?" From a podcast called The Mat Is My Ocean. Daniel Reeves. "We want you as a guest to discuss your journey from academy owner to janitor to viral legend. Does Thursday work?" From former students apologizing for leaving the academy when Carlos left, explaining they'd been offered 3 months of training they couldn't afford to refuse, asking if he'd ever teach again. From Sophie, sent at 11:30 p.m. when she should have been asleep. "Dad, someone showed me a video of you at the gym. You destroyed that guy. Why didn't you tell me you were still training?" Daniel clicked the video link Sophie had sent. Watched himself in janitor uniform facing down Devon. Watched the technique he'd drilled 10,000 times execute perfectly. Watched the crowd's reaction shift from mockery to shock to respect. Watched himself offer mercy when he could have humiliated someone the way he'd been humiliated for 2 years. The video had 2.3 million views now. The comments were split between people celebrating his skill and people debating whether his story was inspirational or tragic. Daniel wasn't sure which side was right. He had to be at the warehouse in 90 minutes. He still needed to shower, eat something, drive across town. But his phone kept buzzing with opportunities he didn't know how to evaluate. Were these real? Were people offering him actual jobs, or just clicking for attention on a viral story? ESPN's MMA coverage picked it up by 9 a.m. Karate black belt working as janitor reminds everyone that skill doesn't disappear. The article included Daniel's competition history, his credentials under Professor Helio Machado, the story of Reeves' combat arts closing, and commentary from martial arts experts about the difference between athleticism and technique. Morning news shows wanted interviews. Good Morning America called his phone 3 times. Martial arts podcasts wanted him as a guest. Joe Rogan's booking team sent an email. Former students reached out apologizing for leaving the academy, explaining they'd been offered deals they couldn't refuse, asking if he'd ever teach again. Gyms from across the country sent messages offering instructor positions, some legitimate, some clearly trying to capitalize on viral fame. Brett Mitchell called him at 7 a.m. "Reeves, we need to talk about your employment." Daniel's stomach dropped. Of course. He'd embarrassed Brett's prospect, made the gym look bad by being simultaneously a janitor and a legitimate black belt. "I understand. I'll clean out my locker." "What?" "No. I want to offer you an instructor position. Full-time assistant coach for the karate program. $45,000 salary, health benefits, teaching schedule." Daniel processed this. "You're offering me a real position?" The video made you famous. Gyms across the country are calling wanting to hire the janitor black belt. "I'd rather keep you here, capitalize on the publicity. Plus, Devon told me what happened after the camera stopped. You showed him mercy when you could have embarrassed him. That's the kind of instructor I want." "And Carlos? Still lead instructor. You'd work under him. I know there's history, but..." "No." The word came out sharper than Daniel intended. "I won't work under the man who destroyed my academy." Brett sighed. "Then what do you want?" Daniel thought about Sophie. About the $12,000 he needed for the custody appeal. About the 175 miles separating him from his daughter. About the studio apartment and the divorce, and the years of humiliation. "I want my own program. I want autonomy. And I want 50% more than what you offered. $67,500. You're negotiating after mopping my floors for 2 years? After proving my skill is worth more than minimum wage? After showing mercy to your prospect when I could have broken his arm on camera. After generating millions of impressions for your gym brand. Brett laughed. It wasn't a friendly sound. You've got balls, Reeves. I'll give you that. He paused. Fine. $60,000, your own schedule, autonomy over curriculum, but you're still teaching under the Titan brand. Take it, or go back to mopping. Daniel thought about his daughter, about pride versus pragmatism, about Rachel's voice saying, "You chose this academy over Sophie staying in your life. I'll take it. But one more thing. I want the first month's salary advance. I need to hire a custody lawyer. Done. Start Monday. And Reeves, don't make me regret this." Daniel's first class as an instructor had 73 students, not because of the Titan brand, because people wanted to train with the janitor who'd reminded everyone that skill and character matter more than circumstance. He taught the fundamentals with patience, focusing on technique over strength, emphasizing respect and discipline over ego and aggression. The same philosophy that had made Reeves' Academy successful now applied to a program he didn't own but could influence. Sophie drove down from Seattle for his first class, watching from the sidelines. His daughter's eyes shone with pride as Daniel demonstrated techniques, corrected students, and built the kind of atmosphere that made martial arts a path for transformation rather than just exercise. "Your dad's really good," one student told Sophie during water break. "I heard he used to own a gym." "He did," Sophie said, "and he's going to fight to have me back in Portland." After class, Sophie pulled Daniel aside. "Mom told me you hired a lawyer, a real one this time. With the advance from this job, yeah. We're filing the appeal next week." Sophie hugged him tight. "I want to come home, Dad. Seattle's fine, but you're here. This is where I want to be." Daniel felt years of defeat start to crack. "I can't promise we'll win, but you're fighting for me. That's what matters." "I became a viral legend mopping floors," Daniel said. "You became proof that skill doesn't disappear, and second chances are possible. That's a better story than giving up." Over the next 6 months, Daniel's program grew. He developed a reputation for taking students other instructors gave up on, people recovering from injuries, older practitioners, people who'd quit martial arts and wanted to return. His classes focused on technique, patience, and the mental game that made karate chess rather than violence. Carlos approached him after one class. "Can we talk?" Daniel considered refusing but nodded. They stepped outside the gym, the California evening warm and quiet. "I was wrong," Carlos said. "Leaving your academy, taking your students, working for Brett. It was all business at the time, but watching what you've built here, how you handled being a janitor without losing your skill or your character. I sold out. You didn't. You did what you thought was right for your family. I can't fault you for that. But I could have done it differently. Could have given you warning, could have helped you transition, could have not taken your best students. I chose the easiest path and told myself it was practical." Daniel studied his former partner and friend. "So what now?" "Now I'm leaving Titan, opening my own academy across town. Different style, different students. No competition with your program." Carlos extended his hand. "And if you ever want to spar, partner, as friends not rivals, I'm around." Daniel shook his hand. "Yeah, I'd like that." 2 years after the viral video, Daniel stood at the grand opening of Reeves Combat Arts. Second chapter. Not the same location as the original academy. That space was now a yoga studio that catered to wealthy professionals who wanted mindfulness without sweat. This new space was in a different neighborhood, a working-class area where rent was affordable and the community needed what Daniel was offering. 3,500 square feet, twice the size of his first academy, with mat space for 40 students at once, and a small office in the back where the business manager worked. Not the same business model either. The first time, Daniel had tried to do everything himself: teaching, managing, marketing, finances, student relations, equipment maintenance. This time, he'd partnered with Marcus Thompson, the former student who'd avoided eye contact in the gym, and then apologized via text message. Marcus had a business degree now, worked in corporate finance, and wanted to invest in something meaningful. They'd structured it so Marcus handled all the financial decisions, the marketing, the business strategy, while Daniel focused purely on teaching. 50-50 ownership split. Equal voices in major decisions. No ego battles over control. This time, Daniel had built a sustainable model that prioritized stability over rapid expansion. No expansion loans. No maxed-out credit cards. No desperation decisions when insparment dipped. They'd started with 20 students and grown slowly over 18 months to 60 steady members. The revenue wasn't spectacular, but it was consistent. Daniel paid himself a modest salary, enough to live comfortably, save for Sophie's college fund, and occasionally take his daughter out for dinner at restaurants nicer than fast food. This time, he knew the difference between pride and principles. Pride was refusing Brett Mitchell's buyout offer because Daniel couldn't stomach working for someone he saw as morally inferior. Principles were teaching martial arts with integrity, regardless of who owned the building. Pride was holding on to control, even when the business was failing. Principles were admitting he needed help and accepting partnership with someone who could manage what he couldn't. Pride had cost him everything. Principles were rebuilding something sustainable. The grand opening was on Saturday morning, sunny and warm, the kind of Portland day that reminded you why people moved here despite the rain. 100 people showed up. Former students, current students, local martial arts community members, friends and family, Sophie's classmates who wanted to see the academy her dad had been building. Sophie cut the ribbon, now living back in Portland full-time after the successful custody appeal, her black belt, earned through 5 years of dedicated training with Daniel, Carlos, and a series of instructors who'd helped fill the gaps when Daniel was working 2 jobs, tied around her waist. She was 16 now, confident and articulate, already looking at colleges where she could study kinesiology and maybe teach martial arts herself someday. "I'm so proud of you, Dad, and I'm glad I'm home." Sophie hugged him after cutting the ribbon, the crowd applauding, cameras flashing, the moment feeling both triumphant and bittersweet because they'd lost so many years to the custody battle. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Daniel held his daughter and felt the weight of everything that had happened. The failure, the humiliation, the grinding poverty, the viral video, the opportunities that followed, the slow, careful rebuild that had led here. This wasn't the story he'd imagined when he'd opened the first academy. This wasn't the triumphant arc where the hero never falls. This was messier, more complicated, more human. Brett Mitchell had sent flowers, a professional gesture acknowledging Daniel's success and the publicity boost the Janitor black belt story had given to Titan. They weren't friends, but they'd developed grudging mutual respect. Devon Cruz showed up to the opening, now a ranked international karate champion with 5 wins in the promotion. "This place looks amazing, Professor. Thank you for what you taught me. I didn't teach you much, just showed you that technique beats strength. You taught me humility. That's worth more." The academy filled with students, some from his original academy, some who'd found him through the viral video, some who simply wanted to train somewhere that emphasized character alongside skill. Daniel looked around the space and felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Peace. Not the peace of having arrived, but the peace of knowing he'd earned his second chance through skill, persistence, and the willingness to rebuild from the bottom. "Professor Reeves?" A young student approached nervously. "I watched your video, the one where you were the janitor. My question is, were you scared?" Daniel considered the question honestly. "Terrified. Every single day. Scared I'd lost everything. Scared I'd never rebuild. Scared my daughter would only remember me as a failure. But you kept training, even as a janitor. Especially as a janitor. The skill was all I had left. I couldn't lose that too." The student nodded, processing. That's really cool, Professor." Daniel smiled. "No, it's really human. We all face moments where we have to decide whether to give up or keep going. I chose to keep going. You can too. That night, after the last student left and the doors were locked, Daniel stood alone on the mats. He thought about the journey from here to rock bottom and back again, thought about what he'd lost, his first academy, his marriage, years of his life to struggle and humiliation. But he also thought about what he'd gained: perspective, humility, proof that skill and character persist even when circumstances collapse. His story wasn't about never falling. It was about standing back up, about mopping floors while remembering who you are, about showing mercy when you could crush someone because you've been crushed and know what it feels like. The belt around his waist hadn't changed color, but Daniel Reeves had changed everything. He wasn't the proud academy owner who'd refused to compromise anymore. He wasn't the broken janitor who'd lost everything either. He was something better, a teacher who'd learned the hardest lessons life could deliver and chose to transform them into wisdom rather than bitterness. That was worth more than any viral video or second chance could measure.